Let's start our journey to the palaces of the desert. Early civilization of Islam, and it was mainly during the time of the Umayyads, and the what should I say, the जो पुराने gems थे उनमें desert में रहने के, they were continuing, they were always wanted to stay in the desert. No matter they had built palaces in the main cities also, and now they were living comfortable lives. But out of their old habits, and according to the habits, they say old habits die hard. They used to go to the desert and stay there. In the early part, they stayed in the tents, but then they started constructing small palaces or houses in the desert, and they often used to go to these desert palaces and enjoy the taste of the old life which they used to have when they were just Bedouins. So that is the main reason of the construction of these desert palaces. Most of them are desolate today. Nothing is, not much of them is surviving today. But at least when we look at some of those which are surviving in somewhat better condition, we can clearly understand their their taste and what type of architecture and their knowledge about Islamic architecture which they knew. And as we go through the course of this lecture, we will see that most of their building techniques or construction techniques, they have some influence of the Roman architecture or architecture of the Roman palaces or Roman villas which were being constructed at that time. So these influences are quite clear in the palaces which we will see. And we will also see that in certain elements they were very, very strong. For example, in stone carving, we see the finest examples of stone carving in their palaces. And at the same time, they also excelled in the art of mosaics. They made beautiful mosaic on the floors. And as the time passed and the more and more and people walked on those floors, these floors became polished and absolutely elegant and shiny at the end of the day. So let's start our journey to the palaces of the desert. There are basically three kinds of these princely structures. The first type consists of 10 large rural princely complexes found in Syria, Palestine, and Transjordan. Now, obviously, because these were the areas closer to Mecca and Medina, which were the center of Islamic Empire at that time, these areas became under the influence of this government, and obviously they were constructing their buildings or palaces in these areas. Now, the construction in Syria, Palestine, and Transjordan dating from about 710 to 750. And during this period, some of the most important palaces were built. For example, they built palace like Al Rusafa, then Qasr al Hayr al East and Qasr al West. They in Arabic they are known as Qasr al Hayr al Sharqi and Qasr al Hayr al Gharbi. Then Jabal Sais and Khirbat al Minia and Khirbat al Mafjar. Then the famous Mishatta Palace or the desert palace of Mishatta. And then Qasr Amra and Qasr al Kharana and Qasr al Tuba. So these are the few of those important palaces which they built in the middle of the desert. One word which has come across is the Transjordan. What is trans? What is Transjordan? Or what is just simply what is trans?
बिटवीन और ट्रांजिशन जिसको हम बोलते हैं जो दोनों को लिंक करे मे बी दोनों के सेंटर में हो
दोनों के सेंटर में हो नहीं थोड़ा
मतलब
सा
इसका जो थोड़ा सा मतलब शिफ्ट करे एक एरिया से दूसरे में इसको ट्रांजिशन स्टेट जिस तरह होती है one phase to another
maybe kind of something between two things, the two ends. Yes. जैसे ट्रांसपोर्ट भी सीधे निकला है ट्रांस जॉर्डन मतलब it is through the city or through the country of Jordan. So trans was हम जब कहते हैं कि he is in the state of trance. That means ना वो इस दुनिया में है ना ऊपर की दुनिया में वो किसी सोच में पड़ा हुआ है. That is also known as a state of trance. So that means somewhere in between are moving from one side to the other. This is the map of Jordan, and over here is this is present day Israel, and this is the West Jordan, the area which is known as Palestine today, very thin and small country. And these are the main places in Jordan which are important from the point of view of our study today. And you can see some of the names like al-Qais, and then Qasr-e Azraq and Qasr-e Amra. Qasr-e Amra is one of the important Qasr or the palace. Qasr, Q-A-S-R, simply means a palace. जैसे Qasr जिसको होता है, Qasr is a person who is living in the palace, and the Qasr is the palace. Sometimes you will find in your studies that Qasr is spelled in a very wrong way, like Qasayr, Qasayr or something like that. But that is misspelling of Qasr. Qasr is Kaf, do nukte wala Kaf, and then Suad and Re, simple. And then Arabic word which means a palace. And if your house is too big, that is also known as a Qasr. And then we have a Qasr Kharana also, yet another important place over here. And these areas which have been, or these names which have been underlined by red, they are the ancient sites which are quite important historically. And they are relevant to the early Islamic history, like the history of the prophets, and in the time much before the time of the prophets. So these are the areas. Actually, the prophets have been moving in this area most of the time. And then the different or the distant place where they went, that was Egypt. And then the Jordan and the Iraq and Syria, and then Palestine, they remain under their control. And then one of our last lecture, we were discussing that this is the area which was known as Canaan. And so you also know many of the prophets were related to that place, particularly Hazrat Yusuf al-Islam. Examples of princely architecture belong to a group of more than 60 ruined or identifiable complexes erected by Umayyad princes. In the past of romantic theory had developed about their locations, suggesting that the remoteness of their sites expressed an atavistic hankering on the part of the Umayyad rulers for the desert, or at least the semi-arid steppe that separates the permanently cultivated areas of Syria and Palestine from their original home in the North Arabian wilderness. A couple of things which need explanation from this slide is, number one is the atavistic hankering. Any idea what is atavistic? First of all, what is atavistic, and secondly, hankering? जी कोई साहब बताएं हमें, what is this? या आपने कोई सुना भी लफ्ज है कि नहीं atavistic? Any idea?
No, sir.
No, अच्छा तो मैं आपको बताता हूँ कि atavistic, the word is derived from once again the Latin language, which is atavus, A-T-A-V-U-S, and atavus simply means forefathers, or what would say forefathers or ancestors. Two meaning for this atavus, forefathers or forerunners or something like this. The hankering is a kind of wish or lodging for something, जिसकी desire आपके अंदर हो. So when we say atavistic hankering, so that means they had a desire to look at their ancestors. And when you say with desire to look at their ancestors, obviously they cannot look at their ancestors, but they wanted to do what their ancestors or forefather had been doing. Now, a good example of this atavistic qualities, I tell you, देखिए एक बंदा है, उसका एक बेटा हुआ, फिर बेटे का एक बेटा और हुआ, और बेटे उसका एक और हुआ. For example, that banda had a son and a grandson and a great grandson. Now, great grandson, if great grandson has some qualities of his great grandfather, those qualities which were not in his father, not in his grandfather, but great grandfather जो आज से 200 साल पहले थे, उसकी quality उस बच्चे में आ गई. So this is known as atavistic quality. ऐसे हो जाता है बार दफा कि एक बच्चा है, उसने बाप का भी कुछ नहीं लिया, माँ का भी कुछ नहीं लिया, दादा का भी कुछ नहीं लिया, दादी का भी कुछ नहीं लिया, लेकिन सडनली जो ग्रेट ग्रैंडफादर है उनका कोई एलिमेंट उसमें आ जाता है. तो दैट इज द atavistic quality. फोर फादर की चीजें उसमें आ जाए. So this is very normal. and it happens in our normal life also. So that is what we know, the atavis or the atavistic anchoring. Anchoring means a wish है कि जिस तरह हमारे आबा अजदाद रहते थे उस तरह हम भी रहें. And because their आबा अजदाद were living in the desert, so they also wish to live in the desert. I remember once I had a chance to go to Libya. तो कर्नल कजाफी ने इनवाइट किया स्मॉल ग्रुप को to come to Libya and have a chat with the people over there and go around this country of Libya. So हम लोग चले गए 10-15 लोग थे ग्रुप में. We went to there and stayed in a hotel in Benghazi. तो जब हमारे जाना था मिलने उनको कजाफी को, तो पता ये चला कि कजाफी है gone to the desert. तो हमें भी वहीं आने पर जाने का कहा गया. So he went to the desert. तो पता लगा कि desert में बड़े टेंट लगे हुए हैं, and he was enjoying life in the desert. So that was the atavistic hankering of Gaddafi. Palaces तो बड़े बने हुए थे, but the life of the palaces sometimes didn't satisfy these Arabs. तो अभी भी मैं, when I was doing my job in Saudi Arabia, so often I used to, when I was traveling from one city to another city, I often saw very well-to-do जो अमीर थे, rich people, rich Arabs, तो वो शामियाने लगा के desert में बैठे हुए, enjoying life in the desert. So that is atavistic hankering. So that is which was very common amongst the Umayyad, because they had recently changed from their desert life to their city life. Semi-arid is very simple. जो ज़्यादा arid भी नहीं है और कम भी नहीं है. Steppe is known as the area, and nothing more to explain in this slide. Okay. If there is anything you want me to explain, please ask. This theory, that is the theory of Atavas, the theory has been disproved for every one of those those turned out to have been a major agricultural trade center, some of which were developed even before the Muslim conquest. तो इनमें कुछ ऐसे भी हैं सेंटर जो मुस्लिम कॉन्क्वेस्ट से पहले बने, but when they became Muslim, then they had to refurbish them and develop them again. Private palaces were built notably at Al-Rusafa. Kasrul Hajj, मैंने सारे नाम आपको पहले भी बता दिए. Those must be considered as early medieval equivalent to the or equivalent of Villa Rustica or Rustique, so characteristic in the ancient Roman period. Now, what is the Villa Rustique? I am sure you don't have the idea what is Villa Rustique, but I am sure you studied Roman architecture when you were in your first year of architecture or second year of architecture, maybe at UET or some other university or NCA. Have you ever come across these words, Villa Rustique?
जी सर ये रोमन हाउसेस को तो नहीं कहते शायद, जिसमें वो सेंट्रल कोर्टयार्ड टाइप कंस्ट्रक्शन जो है वो होती थी एंशिएंट टाइम्स में, एंशिएंट रोमन आर्किटेक्चर के अंदर.
जी बिल्कुल तो है, लेकिन रोमन हाउसेस थे क्या, देयर हैड सेंट्रल कोर्टयार्ड लाइक हमारी हवेलियों की तरह. लेकिन when we say villa is one thing, first of all let's make clear what is a villa. विले अब भी बनते हैं बड़े बड़े शहरों में, छोटे छोटे शहरों में भी. तो विला इज एक्चुअली ए स्टेटली होम, बहुत बड़ा घर सा है, which is actually in the middle of a huge garden or huge landscape, उसको कहते हैं विला. अब जो रस्टिका है, रस्टिका इज फ्रॉम एन इंग्लिश वर्ड रस्टिक. तो रस्टिक क्या होता है, जो गांव का रहने वाला होता है, जिसको आप पेंडू कह लें उर्दू या पंजाबी में. तो विला रस्टिका से मुराद है कि those villas which were built in the areas which are far away from the cities. So those places or those palaces were known as villa rusticae. And उसी के pattern पे, when we look at these palaces of the early Islam, they are also like the villa rusticae. Villa rusticae. This is a villa rusticae here. This is a villa rustica, another one, and villa rustica another. Then after villa rustica, they can add their own name also. For example, this is Dalmatia. This is something else which I cannot read. And this is another one. So these are the villas which were very popular at that time.